Oh, okay. Hope that's okay. But I'll record this because I think there maybe are a lot of people who will watch it afterwards. But we'll dive back into a couple of the different concepts. I've been thinking about them a lot and have pulled together some stories from my life that related to some of the concepts that we're learning. So, and stories from my life and stories from popular culture right now. So I'll share my screen. Okay, so where do you guys want to start? Innovation or cultures and communities? See if we can roll through both of them today. Cool. Yeah, cultures and communities is pretty fun. That was what was whoa, just due for you all last night. But okay, so in cultures and communities, I'll talk a little bit more about my community that I'm a part of. But last night, you can see it in the discussion post. I commented on how our community was developed. But I want to start from a really way back view and just talk about how communities and cultures are developed. And humans, we're super complex. And so we learn to talk to each other through words and through vocal language, but we can also communicate through symbols. And so, yeah, most people know what this symbol is, right? I think Ezra, you got it right on. It's a radiation symbol. And this would be like something that would say there's nuclear fallout, there is an atomic bomb that's just gone out, and that radiation could be dangerous to you. But let's see, not to put you on the spot, Eva, but did you know what the symbol was too?
I didn't.
You didn't. Okay, so that's a really good example because here in our class, 50-50, right? What if you didn't know that meant radiation and all of a sudden you walk into a uranium deposit or a tailings millings pond where they basically are leaving radioactive material like open in a pit. And this actually has happened. We are starting to think about what in like 10,000 years, if we don't have symbols anymore and we don't talk using words, um, maybe we need to have some like big universal symbol that says like this is dangerous. And so it's kind of funny. There's this image of a basically flat open field with these really sharp like steel structures coming out of them. Um, and that is one of the solutions. So here's another symbol. You guys know what the symbol is? I think, yeah, awesome. Totally. A lot of people would associate this with Jesus Christ. And then I see this symbol around a lot too. And so the question is, how can the symbol evolve? So don't want to get super into it, but potentially you can hold both these concepts in your head. Having faith, being a Christian, but also holding that evolution is a driving force in our world. So here's a way to adapt this symbol to then give a nod to the evolution of fish through a tetrapod, which has 4 legs going on to land. So, and then what do all of these symbols have in common? Yeah, awesome. So you'd recognize all 3 of these symbols to mean something along the lines of peace. And then what about this one? This is a photo. Yeah, love, awesome. And that's the heart. You might attach it to the heart that's in our chest, right? When I was teaching cardiology this last year, I came up with this slide looking at like, why is the heart the symbol of love? I was really curious about that. And I found some more history in digging that this was the first earliest coin called the silphium. It was depicted with a heart, which was actually a silphium seed. And that particular seed is known and plant was known for its contraceptive properties and was really a symbol of fertility, which is kind of interesting. The Libyans got rich from exporting it throughout the known world. It's this particular coin was found in the Roman city of Cyrene, which is now shot in Libya. And some other beliefs around the heart is Greek philosophers used to link it to the strongest emotions. Plato went even further, saying the chest played a role in the love. Because like sometimes when you guys feel love, right, you can feel it from emanating from your chest. So then the easy place to say is, okay, that's the heart. Aristotle then went to show that the heart played a role in all human processes. And even over to Roman culture, they said Venus was the goddess of love. She sets hearts on fire, and then her son Cupid, you might know, shot arrows through the heart. And then, yeah, I didn't know this till I looked it up, but they think that, you know how you put a ring on your fourth finger? They thought that that meridian actually went all the way down and into your heart, the vena amoris. They thought that was actually a whole vein, and you can trace back a vein from that finger all the way back to your heart. And so on this line of cultures being communicated through language, it's interesting to note like how language evolved. So can you think of how, well, there's the biblical story of Babylon, right? So all the humans got together. There used to be one proto-language, one language, common language shared between everybody. And then when they built this tower that was pretty big, and maybe you guys could probably tell me the story better, but God said like, hey, not cool. How dare you think that you're better than I am? I'm going to say all of you guys are going to have different languages so you can no longer communicate and make such a big tower. Is that kind of how the story goes?
Yeah, that's actually really accurate.
Okay, cool. I've been studying it because I think it's pretty interesting. But there's another way to think about cultures or language too, right? Like even you can go back and I'm not going to play this video, but if you watched, well, maybe we'll watch the first couple minutes.
The body you are randomly assigned at birth shouldn't determine.
But how do you think all these different cultures had different languages?
In the biblical story of the Tower of Babel, all of humanity developed in different ways. And as they migrated and settled in new places, they became isolated from one another and developed in different ways. Centuries of living in different conditions, eating different food, and encountering different neighbors turned similar dialects with varied pronunciation and vocabulary into radically different languages, continuing to divide as populations grew and spread out further. Like genealogists, modern linguists try to map this process by tracing multiple languages back as far as they can to their common ancestor, or proto-language. A group of all languages related in this way is called a language family, which can contain many branches and subfamilies.
Okay, so yeah, I'll post this link and you can go back and watch the whole video if you want, but one of those linkages is this relationship between tea and chai. So they both come from like, they sound very similar, right? Tea, te. Do you know what tea is in Spanish?
Isn't it like super similar? It's like it's not very difficult. It's like
Yeah, I think that's what it is, what I learned at Tay. And so they're kind of different, but sort of similar, but you can also see here on the map, the blue dots are like a derivative of the Chinese word te, and the red ones are from Sinitic word cha. And so what do you notice about these dots?
the red and the blue are like pretty much like separate, or like got a red in the middle. as well that kind of just like stay together, and then like they're not like really mixed together so much.
Totally. Yeah, so some sort of pattern that groups them together, but keeps them fairly separate as well. Europe, South Africa, and Malaysia. Yeah, awesome. Way to associate those with different places. Um, yeah, so actually that's kind of interesting too. I was just thinking like, oh, of course, different places, like language spreads sometimes more organically, right? And it mixes a lot, but you can see that there's some separation. So it might be that when you already have a word for tea, and that's either te or tea or chai or cha, um, maybe it almost creates like a pressure where there wouldn't be another language that would come in and have it be different, right? So it's like the space is held in that, which makes sense. And this is where we go from things like we can have different words like paternal Pisces. And I don't know. I think this is funny because I like astrology, but is anybody a Pisces? This would be born February into March. No. So they have different qualities, technically, I guess, related to the position of the stars when you were birthed. But anyway, a paternal Pisces, Pisces also means fish. The symbol is these two fish moving around. And that symbol up as the constellations and the stars gives us a way of saying that these people are generous and compassionate. They're kind of mysterious, like a fish that lurks in the water. They're maybe subtle, but understanding and compassionate, maybe because they go around in a circle. They have these kind of two sides to them. So that, again, that's like the position of the stars gave us this idea of concept about values or ways of being that we then take into meaning. Different people have these different values based on when they were born and where that constellation was in the sky. But okay, so if you're looking just at fish, if you had paternal Pisces, what would this word be? Something fish. How could you make it like a... You guys know what the word paternal means? It's kind of a word game. Paternal Pisces, how would it be related to? Yeah, fatherly fish. There you go. And then they also looped in Sanskrit. So Sanskrit is a really ancient language, and they found that actually these proto-languages, Sanskrit was a lot more preserved, but we had a lot of similarities to Hebrew and Germanic languages. And so I think some of these words are really cool because they give us an idea and they relate to something else. So the word sutra, which is like, it would be similar to the Bible for spiritual teachings within Hinduism or yoga, which would be Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. But a sutra is a stitch, right? You would get suture. Has anyone ever had stitches? They call them sutures if you're in the medical field. And so in the same way that you like thread together meaning, you can thread together your skull to keep it together. And then maybe, do you guys know any other Sanskrit words? There's a couple other ones that I have on my slide here. Drishti. This one's pretty cool. I like this word drishti because it means the vision beyond the literal, divine vision, often said to be attained by rishis and sages, known as Shrivya Drishti. But anyway, your drishti, like when you're doing, if you ever do yoga, you always are like looking at something. So you might be looking at your palms. Or you can think of your drishti as your vision. Like if you ever do balancing stuff, it's oftentimes really awesome to have your gaze on something, and that would be your drishti. And as we talk about culture or communities, oftentimes there's a certain vision as well. So I wanted to bring that connection in. And then you maybe have heard the word asana, but asana is like what you might think of as Western yoga, where you're just doing the poses. And that's like a position your body can get in is an asana. Okay, So then bringing this back to community is that language needs company, language needs a community. And they found this out when they studied kids who had been isolated and also were deaf. So they weren't exposed to a lot of language. And what they found is that they were not very good at, or they didn't have a way to communicate. But then they brought together these kids in Nicaragua who had been really rural. And so they were isolated and they were deaf. It was a group of deaf kids that were all rural. Then they brought them together and they found that they weren't interested in learning the language that someone forced on them, but they still came up with a shared common language with themselves, which is really interesting. So I'll just play a little bit. It's a 7-minute video, but I'll just play a couple minutes.
Nicaragua, Central America. Managua. Here, as in other places of the world, there are those who hardly have any language at all. Maria no Name, Mary no name. Deaf since birth, she has been isolated all her life, both from the people who could help her and from others with her disability. Her friend, linguist Judy Kegel, understands the depth of her isolation. The two can communicate just a little, using simple and primitive gestures.
The first time I met her, she was missing the ability to tell me who she was. She was missing the ability to tell me how old she was. She doesn't know her name. In order to tell me who she was, she had to take me home and show me the papers and pictures of her family.
Okay, this kind of brought up for me because I was thinking about this. Like, if you didn't have language and you couldn't communicate, a little bit like, why does it matter? Like, I don't know how to express this concept, but isn't it interesting that she's like, she had to bring me home to my house to figure out who she was. Like, who would you be if you didn't have, like, you're Ava, you're Ezra, I'm Holly, right? Like, or I'm Miss Cat or whatever. Like, how would you communicate to people otherwise who you were? What do you think? I don't know. But that was kind of an interesting point.
Yeah, I think did you almost say like it didn't really like matter? Like,
Doesn't it? Like, when you think about it, like, if I couldn't tell you who I was, maybe it wouldn't matter.
yeah, and maybe she didn't need to know like her name or like where she came from, but like just get to know her in other ways.
Mm-hmm. Totally. Yeah, I like that. Even the holdover of like, here's my family. Like, a family is like where you come from, I suppose. It's interesting to think how much that roots us down into knowing who we are, as like knowing where we come from, like knowing our genealogy or knowing like who our community is. I think a lot of people potentially nowadays are missing that sense of community. They're missing like an idea of identity. This is where I come from. And potentially something that's maybe far beyond the scope. Well, it is within the scope of this class, but I even sat with a friend in like sort of a support group, and she was struggling with how to not be part of a minority group, realizing that sometimes minority groups are oppressed, but she was like jealous of their almost like in-groupness. Like, say, like people, like she was white and she was looking at Black people that she saw, and she was like trying to figure out like, this is really weird. Like, I'm not racist, but she was almost like jealous of their like being able to know where they're from, or having a common understanding or a thread together. So just saying that to say that like this is super complex, but I think it's important for us to have and know who we are and where we're coming from. So then I'm going to bring you to some of these kids, and you can see when they bring these kids together, they start developing their own way of communicating.
Here, educators tried to teach them an existing sign language. The effort failed. The children showed little interest in learning a language forced upon them. Instead, they began communicating with each other in their own way. Judy Cagle was summoned from the United States to sort out the problem.
I came down thinking wherever there were deaf people, there was a sign language, and that obviously there would be a full-blown sign language in full swing here in Nicaragua. And I said, well, you know, I can learn a bit of their sign language if that's what you want, and work with you on learning it. They said, no, they don't have a sign language. They have mimicas. They have mime gestures. And they pointed to a group of kids and said, we want to know what they're talking about.
It turned out they were talking about a lot more than anyone dreamed possible. Cagle had arrived in Nicaragua shortly after the birth of a new language.
Language needs company. Language needs a community. Language needs some sort of a trigger. And I think that trigger is, it's not so much that it needs a community in the sense that there have to be lots of people, but part of being a community is wanting to share information with each other.
Yeah, so having that, I mean, I thought that was pretty profound, just thinking about language needs company, language needs a community. A couple directions to go from there, like how long have you been silent for? I know there's some people who are like, I could never not talk, and other people are like, I don't mind. I mean, I could go for a day. Being online, you guys can type in the chat even, right? So like we are relying far less on our vocal capacity, probably more so now than we have in the past. We can read so much too. But did you also notice other ways that they communicated? I think it's interesting that she used mimicas, like gestures with your hands, because these are such big expressive things that we can move around and we can do things with, and we can, you know, like recreate scenes with our hands. But did you see other ways that they communicated with each other?
Yeah, I think like when they play, maybe they kind of just like show each other like how they're feeling or what they're trying to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. I could see it a lot in their faces too. Like they seemed like they were super expressive with their face motions. But yeah, there's like a way of transmitting how you feel without having to vocalize it, which I think is cool. And so we'll get to how different communities communicate, but you guys probably in both of your churches have a way of communicating, and you have a culture that's set. And I know you reflected on that in your DBAs. There's something that's coming to mind that they talked about in your lessons as well, which is whether or not a culture comes together organically, or is it more engineered or formal. And so here's a system that is this engineered, or I have things on the side here, but would you call this more or less formal in the way that this whole ecosystem comes together?
Is it in that particular situation, like the picture,
Mm-hmm.
or just any situation?
I was specifically talking about this picture. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And then we'll broaden it out.
I think it would be more organically, because I think maybe it's just people who have like the same interests and then decide to build upon that and work together to build something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. And I think it's really special, like to know the difference in a community that comes together organically and then one that has defined visions and values. I feel really fortunate. I guess, let's see, just to this note is like, this is a garden, right? So this came together because someone specifically said, I want cabbage to be here, I want kale to be there, I want lettuce here, and I want there to be shade. This is funny. I met this woman in the garden store, and she was like, I need help hanging this shade structure. And I was like, well, she is like, it's really tall and I need someone super tall. And at the time I had a friend coming in town who was 6'7". And I was like, well, we can help you. So we helped her for about 2 hours. We put this thing up, and it was really neat. I mean, when we think of like the gift economy, which is one of your one of your lessons coming up. You know, like I had lunch today and the lettuce was provided from this garden. Um, and I took care of her friend's dog while I was there yesterday collecting that lettuce. And then I was able to use her paddleboard the other day. And so there's like this really cool gift exchange that's happening. I didn't have to pay money to rent a board, I didn't have to pay money to get lettuce. And all that happened because I put in some time and effort and had a friendship, which is kind of a cool like situation. But that contrasted to this scene, which is a hike I did last week. But this is, there's some sort of organization here, right? Can you sense where there's a pattern that you might see here in this clip?
They both have to do with like nature, and I think that this could be more organized or engineered because the hike.
Yeah, I think you kind of went digital. You went in and out a little bit, but it sounded like I think you said like where there's there's more down by the river, like closer to this river system. And that is, yeah, that's called a riparian zone. So this, like where all of these trees come together by the river, um, that's where communities are going to be found. We're going to have all different sorts of willows and Russian olive and aspen. They're all going to come together down by the river here, black brush. So these are two different ways for ecosystems to happen, and those two different ways happen in communities too. So like Ezra said here, especially in close-knit ones, there's a kind of trade-off where people tend to offer their services for free or exchange for other goods because it's for the common good. Yeah, totally. I like that. I'm gonna skip that for a minute. Okay, so this is bringing this into my community. This is actually a robot that was built by one of the artists who is part of our community, and there's the food truck over there. And so this plaza came together last year in October, and I reflected a little bit in my discussion, but our community started to form because people just kept coming by. They liked the feel of it. They enjoyed being able to do some work for food because it's a donation-based food truck. And then we had this whole plaza come together. The before picture was like, this was just a total free for all jungle yard. There wasn't any organization. And then we added tables and gardens and artwork and places to play. But my question is, how do people who come here know the values, mission, and vision and goals of the organization? Like, for example, you might understand that you might not know like the extent by which we're trying to accomplish a gift economy, but you might see that there's a lot of more flexibility with that, with it being a donation-based food truck. So that's one thing that happens in our community that gives you an idea of like the broader view of what we believe. And then you might not, like with the goals, you might see that we're trying to have sustainable, locally grown food because you can see the garden. And we also talked about it though, there's a more formal way of doing this. So we all got around the table and talked about what our vision and goals were. And we're able to share those together at this. This came together a couple weeks ago. We have someone in our community who is a what is it called, carpenter, and then someone who's an artist. And so we built this message board. And so this is a way for our messages to be sent, for there to be one local zone where people know like what the values and goals are more formally. Okay, So then I want to transition to another group that I'm a part of. This is Wild West Voyages, and this is one of my friends. He is a guide there. This is after work one day. I was driving by and I saw they were just standing there, so I went over, and they were just finishing up wrapping up these boats on top of the car, and it got me thinking, like, how do you know how a culture is determined? You can see, like, by how willing employees are to go the extra step. So here, like, this is kind of an ordeal to get on, put all of these uh, put all of these duckies together. They're called duckies, like inflatable kayaks, right? And it was really sweet too, because someone was like, I wonder how long it's going to take him to put a strap around the front all the way to the car. And instead of just like barking the order at them, she asked him, like, hey, have you thought about putting a strap there? And I thought that was just like a super really chill, nice and easy way for someone to give feedback to someone and help improve safety. And then I think it was interesting to note, like, how do team members interact outside of work? So then this is all of us, we went out on a run afterwards, and we called ourselves the Spontaneous Jogging Club. But this helped to build culture. They've worked together all day long, but now they get to actually just give back to each other in a really cool way, and by going out and sharing space and going on a run together. And then tonight is a full moon. They're going out on a full moon kayak together, which I think is really cool. And the final story here for my community is this is the East Bench Garden. It's a community garden that I'm a part of. And one day we came back after there was a storm, and this tree had come down. So one side of the branch had totally come down. And your lessons talk about critical incidents and how those can be defining moments for a culture. And so this could have been a problem, like really big problem, but I saw it and I was able to text the person who runs the garden. And then I started she told me, like, okay, well, maybe Ken will come by, and Ken, he's the landowner, ended up coming by and helping. And I was trying to get all of this together, but he came by with his chainsaw, and the next day had it all chained out. And now this can be a disruption that's used for good, a silver lining or some sort of positive outcome. But I'm really excited. These now, can you think of what the stumps can be used for?
It could be like another sitting area.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, so I was thinking you could put all of these in a big circle and then have story time. Yeah, support for benches. So where, like, this would hit me really hard at, because I was like, oh my gosh, it's so sad this tree got taken out. But then to see the silver lining of it all, and to know that the community came together. You can see in the distance here, this is broken. It's kind of hard to see, but this whole board had tipped over. And then I got the help of, this is Loa, she's 10 years old, and then my friend Brian. And I learned how to put this back together. And together we actually improved the message board, because the cork board had been broken anyway. And so we have a brand new message board at this community garden. Oh gosh, I said final, but here's the final. The last one is in sports teams. Are you guys part of sports teams? I think, I can't remember. Actually, are either of you? I don't remember. Basketball, that's right. So this is one of my former students. Her name's Calypso, and they came down to Moab. They live in Emory, and so they don't live nearby. But they came down and ran. We did Girls on the Run together when we were younger. And my point here is a little bit is like, is it all about the finish line? And here, this comes from the founder of the modern Olympic Games, Baron Pierre de Coubertin. He said the most important thing is not to win, but to take part. And so at the end, you know, I think it's more important not crossing the finish line, but who's there to support you. This is her sister Purity and their friend Sophia. And you can see that they're super supportive. This is a couple meets later, but they are helping each other even take off their shoes. And there's values that you can find in a team. So here's another meet we went to. I thought it was interesting. They had in cups written on the fence, be kind, resilient, and loyal. But how do these different values take form? How does a mascot shape a team? So we're the Red Devils, which is sort of interesting, but I don't know. I don't want to dive into exactly how being the Devils takes form in our group, but instead look at the banana slugs. And they may or may not be, slugs are kind of slow, but I don't think everyone at Santa Cruz is that slow. But that's an interesting mascot too. Thinking of mascots, there's this principle, and I'll leave you with this. I think everything after I am creates. So thinking about who you are and saying every time you say I am, you're making a declaration of who you are. So I think heavily about like to say like we are the Devils. Like what does that mean? But even little things like I am smart versus I am stupid. How does that then go to create your worldview? Yeah, and that's what I got for you. If you want to come back at 2 o'clock, we'll open this up again, and my friend Amanda's going to come on, and we're going to talk about her company culture at Amazon. So that'll be really cool. She's an amazing human being. She's transitioning into teaching. So she's really excited to talk to all of you. So I hope you join us, take a break, go to the bathroom, and then come back at 2. It probably will be like a 30-minute chat.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Awesome. I hope that was helpful. We'll see you in a bit.